Here are 8 stats that are defining the 2026 MLB season. Let's dig in. The first one is impacting every facet of the game in a subtle way, and it's directly connected to the ABS shrinking the majority of players' heights. The zone rate in MLB took a massive hit this season. Pitchers are in the zone just 47% of the time, which is down from an 18-year high of 50.6% last season. That's a 3 percentage point drop, and it's massive. This number almost never changes by more than half a percentage point year over year. Whether there's actually some skill loss by pitchers who are more wild, or if it's entirely based on the top of the zone shrinking via the ABS challenge system is a good question. If you're making a blame pie, it's probably 90% ABS, 10% related to early season weather or other things I'm not thinking of. It's probably too early to tell if it's a skill loss by pitchers. The ABS shrunk the height of 250 hitters, and as a result of that, the top of the strike zone for those hitters has contracted. The challenge system is also measured at the middle of the plate, so in theory, if your breaking ball clipped just the front of the zone, it would no longer be a textbook strike. It seems like four-seamers and breaking balls are being affected more than sinkers and cutters if you look at how the zone rate of each of these individual pitches has changed over time. The effect it's having on hitters is that they're swinging less. A 46% swing rate for the league is the lowest we've seen since 2014, and the league's 10% walk rate entering the third full week of the season is the highest it's been in the last 75 years. In theory, pitchers who work at the top of the zone with a four-seam fastball should be affected the most by this, and I think for the most part, the data confirms that. Pivetta, Ray, Joe Ryan, Luzardo are all kind of in that bucket, and their zone rates are down. So the textbook zone is smaller. As a result of that, pitchers are not in the zone as much. Hitters are very much aware. They're not swinging as much. The walk rate is really high. I think on a game-to-game basis, perhaps there is a bit less action, which maybe isn't great for the sport, but I really think eliminating all those atrocious calls that we would troll on Twitter and elsewhere over the past couple years is more of a benefit than the subtle amount of action that we've lost in every game. Stat number 2, Mason Miller has thrown in 8 games, and he has a 74% strikeout rate, 27 batters faced, 20 strikeouts. Since 2008, the highest strikeout rate we've seen in a season for a pitcher with a minimum of 500 pitches thrown was Aroldis Chapman in 2014. Craig Kimbrell is right up there from 2012, and Edwin Diaz in 2022 is our most recent 50% strikeout rate season. To get to this 40 to 50% strikeout rate area, you need to hold a 20% swinging strike rate for a full season. Basically, 1 in every 5 pitches you throw needs to be swung at and missed by the hitter. Miller is around 30% right now, so it's not just that he's getting lucky or doing a really good job putting away hitters. Most of what we're seeing in the underlying data is actually kind of sustainable. And you may think to yourself, well, Mason Miller is just very good, this is what he does, which is a fair point, but I'll also call out that Miller has changed some things from last season. He's cutting the ball slightly more, and as a result of that, his slider's added depth and sweep. But the larger change, if you're just trying to justify how this guy got so much better from already being elite, is to look at his lefty approach. He threw 53% fastball to lefties last season. This season, he's throwing just 35% fastball. His slider usage, the shape I just mentioned, went from 42% to 58%. And behind in the count, instead of ripping almost 70% fastball just to get over and get a strike, not walk a guy, he's now at 86% behind in count slider. He's essentially saying to hitters, hey, I know my four-seam got tagged a bit last year by lefties, especially early in the season, so I'm just not going to throw it as much, and I'm going to challenge you to not chase. And hitters cannot stop chasing. Miller is able to employ this heavy slider strategy to left-handed hitters because his strike feel for the offering is very strong. Even if you go back to last season, he was zoning this thing around 50% of the time, which is above average, especially when you consider that it has above average velocity for a slider and above average depth. It's generally hard to zone these bigger, harder shapes, but Miller can do it, so it allows him to throw this pitch in situations where hitters are mostly expecting four-seam fastballs. The question is whether he actually ends up with a 40 to 50% strikeout rate if you give him, say, 70 to 75 innings. My answer right now is yes. I'm not entirely sure where he ends up in that window, but the underlying data is so strong, it's very easy to see that he is the best per-inning pitcher in baseball. Stat number 3 is a simple one. 2 teams are now calling pitches from the dugout. The Marlins started doing it last year, and the Rockies started doing it this year. It's caught a lot of flack in the media, Carlos Rodon saying it'll affect player free agent value, which is a very fair point, but I unfortunately don't think teams really care about that. I made a video on this when I found out the Marlins were going to start doing this late last season. The idea is basically that coaches in the dugout can contextualize situation, hitter-pitcher strengths, hitter-pitcher weaknesses better than catchers can. And even if you bleed some value because the catcher can use his intuition to gauge hitter adjustments intra-game, their bet is that you gain more value in the long run by being optimal on pure usage over the course of 162. I'll also point out that it might be working. The Marlins had the 7th worst SIERA, skills independent ERA in baseball last season, and they're middle of the pack this year. The Rockies had the worst SIERA in baseball last season, and they're also middle of the pack. The Mets toyed with this during spring training as well, although we don't have any evidence they're 100% doing it in the regular season this year. I've also heard that 2 other organizations are playing around with this pitch calling from the dugout strategy, the Nationals and the Royals, despite the fact that in talking to people in both those organizations, I wasn't able to fully confirm that yes, they're using it for every pitch. I didn't see any reporting on this in the public as well from beats in either of those cities, so I guess this is my way of speculating and saying, hey, at least these 2 teams have considered it to the point where perhaps they're using it in specific situations that I'm just unaware of at this very moment. But this gets to the larger point. When I made that Marlins video last year, I wondered how many teams would adopt what the Marlins are doing. And I think at this point, if you project to say 2028, 2029, the over-under is probably around 6.5 to 7.5 teams. So the question to you is whether we get to 8 to 10 to 15 teams in the future. Is this something that the league starts to actually glob onto and love? Because at the end of the day, when the Rockies are doing something better than you, I think the league will take notice to the point where they will copycat the team that has mostly been looked down on for the last 15 years. Quick one before we move on to the number 4 stat. I encourage you to check out my Substack if you're not already a subscriber. I've seen a lot of people on this channel jump over to that, so I very much appreciate you. $5 a month, $30 a year. This is the first year it's entirely behind a paywall. Only way to get it is to contribute some kind of money. There's a 7-day free trial if you're not entirely sure if it's a fit for you, but it's really cool. I basically write about 6 days a week on the prior night's pitchers and what I see in terms of their changes, in terms of their stock up or down. There's also some larger tentpole pieces which you'll get access to. I do a pitching prospect update around the midseason, so it'll probably come out in early June. A lot of draft stuff I'll do as well. I'm working on maybe some kind of top 100-ish pitcher ranks, but not entirely sure if I'll get to that, so no promises. But if you haven't already checked it out, I encourage you to do so. Number 4, four-seam fastball velocity for right-handed starting pitchers is averaging 94.8 miles per hour this season, which is a 0.3 mile per hour jump from last season and a full 3 miles per hour higher than it was in 2008, which is the first year we have velocity data. And I will emphasize, no, how pitch velocity is being tracked is not affecting the number on this pitch. Please update your belief system if you still think that. Pitchers are throwing harder largely due to league incentives and far better understanding of how to train in order to prioritize velocity. Higher velocity generally means more success. And the weird thing about velocity is that there aren't diminishing returns. As you add velocity, it actually becomes more advantageous for you to continue adding more velocity. This is a bit counterintuitive. Money has diminishing marginal utility, so incremental dollars mean less as you make more. Yes, economic stuff, I know it's very scary, but velocity is the opposite. That's why I find it so interesting that the rate of growth on velocity is actually kicked up over the last few years relative to before the 2020 season. It's not really showing any signs of slowing down. What has kind of stagnated, though, is max velocity in Major League Baseball. Tough to be certain about this because Aroldis Chapman is like the lone guy throwing hard for a pretty long period of the early teens in terms of baseball history, but this trend line isn't nearly as straight as the average velocity trend line. Robert Stock mentioned in a Twitter thread that he's not entirely surprised the max velocity in the league hasn't slowly increased as we're seeing average velocity do. It probably relates to the fact that that top end 105, 6 mile per hour velocity isn't really incentivized or paid for. It also comes back to the point that is larger, really just that pitching is a very complex exercise with a lot more things in it than just throwing, say, 108, 109 miles per hour. Can the league get to the point where that's incentivized? Absolutely. But at this moment in time, I think there's a proverbial ceiling on this 104, 105 area. But that doesn't prevent teams from optimizing the guy who's throwing 91 and getting him up to 93, which again will move the league average further forward over the next 5 or 10 years. Number 5 is that the league's combined four-seam and sinker usage through the first 3 weeks of the season is below 47% for the first time, probably in the history of the sport. It's down almost 10 percentage points from 2008, where it was up at 57 to 58%. 1 in every 10 pitches thrown now that's not a fastball would have been a fastball about 20 years ago. It feels small, but it's pretty seismic when you're talking this big a sample of data. I do think we've hit the floor here, however, and I say that for two reasons. Number one is related to the first stat I brought up. The league zone rate is down because of the ABS strike zone. I just wonder if it's going to take a second for the league to identify the fastballs they actually want to throw and start ripping them more in order to be in the zone more. Number two is that when you dig deeper and look at the teams that have actually changed usage up or down, a few things stand out. Two of the biggest fallers in fastball usage are organizations that underwent pretty widespread staffing changes in their front office that have affected their pitching departments. This would be the Nationals and the Rockies. And the one that has increased the most has a new pitching coach. Bill Murphy went to the Pirates from the Astros. He's also the king of the slow walk out to the mound, so congratulations. Murphy brought with him a pretty interesting pro fastball anti-slider approach early in the year for the Pirates starters and relievers. Mitch Keller, Cameron Modzinski, Braxton Ashcraft, Montgomery, Soto are all down in slider usage and up in curveball or sweeper usage. So there's a preference for bigger shapes alongside more fastball. And they as a team have a top 5 strikeout rate this year after being 19th last season. So two things here. Number one, I do think we've hit a floor on fastball usage. I don't really expect to see a decrease over the next 5 years or so. I think what we'll see is a subtle uptick as teams start to identify what four-seam fastballs they like and sinkers they want to throw more. Number two is that every offseason I mentioned, when a team turns over staff, whether it's front office or on-field pitching coach personnel, we often see shifts in strategy that aren't entirely captured by projections. So these teams that undergo these larger scale changes, to me, just run into more variance from a projected wins or ERA or team outcomes generally. And we saw this with the Pirates, who are probably pretty good this year. The Nationals are kind of struggling, and the Rockies pitching staff actually looks really strong. So if you're crazy like me and you're trying to think ahead to the teams that maybe change in the future, the two I'm going to bring up are in the same division. The Athletics and the Angels are two organizations that I imagine will see some top-level infrastructure changes with over the next few years. That will create variance and perhaps a lot more success for those teams from a pitching development standpoint. For number 6, well, I kind of lied to you. Combined four-seam and sinker usage is down across the league, but if you split this out by pitch type, sinkers are actually up and four-seamers are down. The net of the two is what I was talking about. I know, it's a little sneaky. The league has thrown 16.7% sinkers through the first 3 weeks. It's the highest mark since 2018. It's up for lefties more on a percent basis than it is for righties, but both are trending positively. It's also the largest year-over-year increase in sinker usage for the league since 2009-2010. This comes after 6 consecutive seasons where sinker usage basically flatlined, which came after a 2017-19 window where the league slashed nearly 5 percentage points of sinker usage, which is kind of an insane number to cut over just a couple years. Now, the number that I'm surprised isn't ticking up is cutter usage. It's been pretty stable over the last few seasons. I say this because layered in the theme of mixed diversity, which I'm very aware I talk about incessantly on this channel, is the 3 fastball approach. This was popularized by the Mets and Yankees organizations alongside a few others and brought even more to the forefront of everybody's mind by Cam Schlittler flipping from a slider to an insane cutter early this season and blowing away a bunch of hitters. Maybe it's not so much that cutters are being used more, but rather that more pitchers have one, or at least are experimenting with one. So this sinker uptick we're seeing this year is probably not a blip. I expect that to continue, but I also expect cutter usage to jump up as well. And the reason I say this is related to the most recent video I did before this one, which was on the topic of spin efficiency and the fact that so many people in baseball I talked to said that teams were not doing enough to adjust this in order to get pitchers to have better quality sinkers and cutters specifically. The more on side of the ball you are, the more you're able to induce seam effects and create better sinker and cutter shapes. So over the next couple of years, I kind of expect both these pitches to creep up, layered into my point that I don't think we are going to see any more dip in overall fastball usage. And as a result of that, as you see quality of individual pitches jump up, sinkers and cutters, I imagine the league is going to want to use those offerings more, especially, again, with a smaller strike zone. Number 7, Luis Robert Jr. cut his swing rate from 53% to 41%. It's the largest drop in baseball among qualified hitters. And he's currently about 70% better than the league average hitter, a mark he hasn't sniffed since 2021. Now, this connects to my point about swing rate being down overall for the league, which I mentioned off the top. But in talking to some hitting folks, there are 2 ways to improve swing decisions. The first is what Robert is doing, which is to just stop swinging. Somebody referred to this as artificial swing decision improvement. Sure, it's better, but it's not exactly what you want. There's this weird thing in baseball that so few hitters actually have positive run value when they swing that the advice for hitters a lot of the time is just to swing less. But because you're probably not going to score if you don't swing, there's a bit of game theory involved here. The ideal path forward, the non-artificial improvement in swing decisions, is to drop your chase rate and up your zone rate. So don't swing at pitches you can't do damage on, swing at pitches that you can do damage on. The ratio of those two things is harder to change because it's kind of like a compound skill. Now, if you were performing as poorly as Luis Robert Jr. was, then the all-encompassing, I'm just gonna stop swinging, usually works. So Robert improved, no doubt, but we can make a ratio of zone swing to out of zone swing and try to eliminate those who are in the artificial bucket. The biggest improvers in that ratio are Colt Keith, Miguel Vargas, Spencer Torkelson, Matt McLain, and Riley Green. 3 Detroit Tigers on that list, which is really interesting to me as to whether this is a coincidence or if there's actually some philosophical thing going on there that shifted and it's manifested in these 3 players. Also, shout out to John Heyman, who in my bold predictions video told us that the Tigers would win the World Series. Shout out to John Heyman again for giving me a bold prediction in my bold predictions video. That was a really fun one. If you haven't seen it, I encourage you to go back and check it out. But anyways, in getting back to the swing decisions point and the ratio of good swings to bad swings, I want to point out Colt Keith looks really strong off the bat. Spencer Torkelson, a bit slow out of the gate. Riley Green looks like he has changed something. It's just that the barrel rate hasn't really met up with what it was last season, which was astronomically high. Although perhaps there's some weather effects on all of these guys. The main thing I want to point out is that I do think in analyzing swing decisions, looking at these 2 buckets of zone swing and out of zone swing is a good way, not necessarily to identify who's like automatically going to be a better hitter, but at least identify the guys who are going through process changes. Put them on your like watch list, so to speak, as guys that perhaps if they round into form, like if Riley Green is walking 10% of the time, cut his walker rate to 20% and then holds a 17% barrel rate, he's going to be one of the best hitters in baseball. The guys that change things are always the ones that I'm kind of keyed on early. So these 3 guys on the Tigers are very interesting names to keep an eye on as we progress through the rest of the 2026 season. And number 8, the last one here, with usage going down on things like fastballs and even sliders, which is a bit surprising to me. Slider usage has fallen this season for the first time since 2013-2014. Something has to increase, right? We talked about that with sinkers, but how about off-speed pitches like splits and changeups? Yes, splitter and changeup usage is just under 15% league-wide, the highest level we've seen in the pitch tracking era, which goes back to 2008. Splitter usage doubled between 2022 and 2024, and it was highlighted in the postseason with the Blue Jays and the Dodgers, 2 of the more splitter-happy teams in baseball last season. The emergence of kick changeups have also been a story over the last couple years. The percent of changeups thrown that are above 85 miles per hour with a lot of drop, which I'm going to consider below this 4 inches of induced vertical break barrier, has literally doubled since 2022. Go back to 2008 when pitch tracking started, and this number was minuscule compared to now. We're looking at a 10 times increase of these depthy, hard drop changeups. We've also seen a subtle increase in right-on-right changeup usage, which is something I've always been a fan of. We're up a full percentage point since 2024 in those kinds of changeups, currently sitting at an all-time high in the pitch tracking era. When one thing maxes out, like slider usage, it just kind of seems like the league pushes towards something else. And for the last couple seasons, that hasn't really been fastballs apart from sinkers, as we're going to see. But I'm wondering whether splitter usage can actually jump to like 4 to 5% from the 3%ish it is right now. I wonder if we see more arms and philosophies come over from Japan in terms of guys throwing multiple, change-up split, multiple split variations as we try to optimize the mix expansion for those guys who are more pronator types, which I did talk about a lot in my immediate prior video to this one. Thanks as always for checking out my channel. I encourage you to sub to my Substack, also sub to this channel, share the channel, comment. I'm happy to. I try to jump in the comments as much as I can and chat it up with you guys, as long as the comments are civil, which I have to say, for the most part, you guys have been great with that, so I very much appreciate it. Enjoy what has already happened or I hope you enjoyed what has already happened in the 2026 season. I'm excited for a lot more ball talk as we continue deep into 2026. Take care.